It is the most wonderful time of year. It's Masters Week, and along with it being the first major of the season, depending on where you live, perhaps you're seeing some signs that you might actually get out to play the game here at some point. But we all know this, at the tail end of Masters Week, unless you're blessed with a badge to be there, you're glued to your TV watching the coverage, and we all have memorized the holes and the strategies. And some of you who are really sickos have the history committed to memory. There's a kind of a unique wrinkle possible for this year, a kind of a new way to enjoy the Masters that's becoming more and more common in the kind of the sports consumption realm. And my friend Brandt Packer is with us. He is a longtime executive producer with Golf Channel and CBS, and now he's out on his own doing some things. And his father is the late Billy Packer. In fact, Brandt and I connected a few days ago on a different podcast that I do called Church Pew Sports. I'll put the link to that in the notes here so you can go and listen to a kind of a family focused conversation about life and being the son of a legendary broadcaster. But it's good to see you again here in the golf space, and I'm catching up with you now before you head to Augusta because you'll be there for some really fun stuff, including this new concept of the second screen experience. So that's my long-winded introduction, man. How are you?
Hey, good. Good to see you again. We had gone way too long, and now I figured every 3 days kind of makes sense. So I loved the other day. That was fun. There was some great topics, and it's crazy not to get off on hoops, but how since those 3 days, the articles and the tweets that came out of people who are in that position to make differences and have their opinions on it. It's
Oh,
crazy. So, but now we're into the golf world, which it's always a fun 2 weeks out of the year.
yeah, and in this conversation, you and I are going to dive into this just the world of televised golf in general, because we know it's a hot button amongst diehard fans. But before we get to that, bring us inside what this unique and, by the way, free opportunity is for our audience to take part in kind of an emerging technology.
Yeah, so I'll do it as quick as I can. It's called Let's Hang Live, and the founder, really of the ManningCast, a guy named John Klein, who was the executive producer of 60 Minutes and of CNN, uh, developed this concept and he did research and realized that over 80% of people who watch a sporting event use a secondary device, whether they're text chain with people, they're on Twitter, they're looking at stats, whatever. So his concept was, how do I get that 84%? And I want to own that 84%. I don't want anything to do with the rights fees of the TV. And so ironically, he was a big New York Giants fan and did one with Eli Manning as a test several years ago. It was hugely successful. So in essence, the concept is you sign up for free and you turn the volume down of what you're watching and you hang with, for example, if you're watching a Giants game, it was John and Eli Manning, and it's a Zoom. And you have the ability to zoom in. You can either text questions or zoom in and ask a question. So as you're watching the Giants and it was a big 3rd and 6, and you wonder what the play is against, let's say, the Ravens, you could have zoomed in and asked Eli, hey, Ray Lewis, what's it like on a 3rd and 6? And he would tell you, everyone loved what Romo did years ago when he was, kind of calling the plays. Well, now you can, in essence, be a Romo. And so we were connected with a third party about trying to do something in golf. And we threw different ideas around. And I had actually had some ideas for NIL for universities as well, to try to get college players that while you're watching a game, you could be talking to a head coach of your basketball team and a couple of their players, or, all that sort of thing. So anyhow, in the golf world, we started to decipher how can we do this. And Faldo, Nick Faldo's been a good friend for a long time. I had the chance to produce him when I was at ABC with Ian Azinger. And I just had an idea that Nick's a perfect guy for this. And I reached out to him and I got halfway through my spiel and he stopped me and he calls me Pac-Man. Pac-Man, I'm in, let's do it. Let's do it. And so we kind of got on a call the next week with his team and John and his team. And there's a great way to monetize this on the bottom for sponsors that it's interactive in terms of sponsorship. So there's live testimonials as you're doing it and watching it with the sponsors, and the sponsors own that data. So in essence, they have a focus group. So instead of spending a commercial $100,000 commercial in January. It's the same one that ends in December. The sponsors have ownership in this as well. And so we did our first test at the Players 2 weeks or whatever, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was up in Montana at his house. And the cool thing is Nick has a track man in a demo area. So the other cool thing is as we were watching the final round of the Players, if there was some swing or some shot that happened, Nick got right up and went into the track man to demo it. So, okay, Scheffler, here's what he was doing. Oh, I'm left-handed, but you want to do this and you want to do that. And then you could zoom in and ask a question and say, Nick, what's it like on 17? Crosswind, back right flag with a wind off the left. And he would tell you. You could say, Sir Nick, Masters question, live question, my golf swing. Can you look at my golf swing and dissect it? He would dissect it. So you could go to the range on Monday and say, well, wow, Brandt, you're hitting it pretty good. Well, I got a lesson from Nick Faldo yesterday. Oh, sure you did. Yeah, of course you did. And we had some cool guests, Jim Nance, Freddie Couples, Peter Jacobson, and they had blown the horn 9 minutes into our show. So my old producer habits kicked in, his old announcer habits kicked in. And instead of us panicking, we had a great show because I was texting Fred and Fred's like, yeah, I'll stay for 30 minutes, whatever you want. So we had this incredible interaction with Fred Couples, and then the fans were able to ask questions about the Masters, anything. As you know, Peter Jacobson's one of the great storytellers of all time. Peter's probably still talking. I should text Peter and tell him that we're done. And Nance was in the Bahamas, and they all stayed for 30 minutes and were interactive. And so we're going to do one at the Masters. It's going to be a little bit different since Nick is working for Sky. It's going to be more of a post-game show on Sunday. But it's free. It's Let's Hang Live, and it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. It's very similar to the Manning cast, except you are, as the fans, are also interactive. So instead of sitting back and listening to Peyton and Eli and Belichick break something down, you, in essence, can take that next step and ask Belichick or Peyton or Eli a question as you're watching. So it's really, really fun and very cool.
And in the Manning cast, you're also watching the game on
Right.
your main screen. And in this
Right.
case, you're on a second screen, not watching the live coverage because there's
Right.
all the rights fees and all the other stuff that comes into play.
But it's really smart.
To hear you say 84% of us are doing
Yeah.
something along with watching, first of all, it makes me feel less insane when my wife looks over at me and says, "Are you even watching this?" I'm like, "Yeah,
Right.
I'm fully in on it."
Yeah.
But I'm also communicating with my friends, right? So
Yeah.
you've got this locker room or clubhouse feel to this second screen deal. I knew that you could text in your questions. I didn't realize you could also like visually appear on Zoom and come into the same screen with whoever's watching.
Yeah, for example, it would, let's say it's you and Jim Harbaugh watching a Michigan game, and I could chime in right now, and you see my face appear. The only difference is it'd be you on a split screen with Coach Harbaugh, or whoever, any Michigan or Ohio State or whatever. They've done a bunch of in multiple sports. Ohio State, Notre Dame. They've done some great ones. The Super Bowl, they did them, and so our plan is to do them through the majors all year and culminating at the Ryder Cup. And and the cool thing about it is there's other people, they don't have this technology, but there's other people starting to do this. And I think the neat thing with golf is that, because I've heard some people say to me, oh great, Faldo, I thought he retired. Well, he did, but he's so involved in this that if he wasn't your cup of tea, no problem. But I personally, I want to hear from a 6-time major champion. So if I'm at the Masters and there's a question about the Masters, there aren't many that have won it more than 3 times. And same with the Ryder Cup. Now you talk about the Open. He lost the U.S. Open. I mean, when you get a World Golf Hall of Famer, who's that? And the beauty is you can do it anywhere. That's you don't have to fly into a studio, and it's all done through the cloud, and it's very, very cool. Let's say it's Let's Hang Live. It's free, interactive, and something that I think can take off and really have a lot of fun with.
So on Masters Sunday, what time should our audience be aware of Let's Hang Live?
Yeah, we're shooting for 8 o'clock, hoping there's not a playoff because we're going to do it from Nick's house. He rents a house. It's not too far from Augusta National. Obviously, you can't really do it from the grounds. That would be frowned upon. But he is, if you go to his his Instagram, his TikTok, his Twitter, he's going to be doing promos all week, from driving down Magnolia Lane, once he leaves the Tuesday night dinner, he's going to do a little something to kind of promote. Here's what we're going to talk about on Sunday night. He's playing in the par three. He's doing all the broadcasting. So there's a lot of really cool stuff to get into. And he's promised he'll get into, hey, if there's somebody that's on the live side that was a past champion on Tuesday that had an issue and said something, he's going to spill the beans. So he's all fired up. So like I said, I think it's very cool. I think it could be a lot of fun. And if I was a golf fan, especially we weren't prepared for them to blow the horn at the players, especially 9 minutes in. But it became, and we were trying to be on for about an hour and a half. We were on for 2 hours and 34 minutes
Wow.
because we had people from all over the world. We had people from Brazil, from Australia, from England, that just were fascinated and said, "Wow, I can ask Nick or Freddie or Jim or whoever a question," which was pretty neat.
Well, we will put the link to Let's Hang Live in the podcast notes, and we would love to have some of our folks connect with it. I may try to do the same thing just to see how it all looks live and in
Hop
picture.
on in. Love to have. And again, this one's gonna be a little bit different because it's a post game
Yeah,
rather than interactive as you watch. But like I said, we're at the mercy of what
right.
Nick's schedule is.
Well, this Masters experience is so unique. It's so special. As I alluded to in the introduction, there's a familiarity with the course and of course the back nine. Everybody, who's into the game kind of has that whole thing memorized. As you,
Second nine. They're the first and second nines. Remember that. It's
that's
not front
true.
and back. Second
Maybe,
nine.
maybe that's why they keep denying my credential request. I keep going
It's
back.
been ingrained. Trust me.
When was your first time on that property, and do you remember your first, eye-popping moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I 90, let's see, I want to say it was 90 or 91. I was very lucky. When my dad did the Final Four, my mom and dad and I would always go Tuesday night, stay at the CBS rents a country club called Westlake Village down there. We'd stay at a house and go to Wednesday. That was my mom and dad's favorite thing, is the Wednesday par three.
Hmm.
And we'd always kind of see Nance and rough them up and that sort of thing. And I remember Mickelson had won the USAM, and being a lefty, I didn't realize it, but Jim had set up an introduction to Phil Mickelson, who gave me a golf ball from Arizona State, which I was just couldn't believe. And then obviously, trying to see hello to Freddie Couples and the guys that we knew. And the cool thing for me is that coming right off the Final Four with my dad and that being a practice round, any hole we'd go to, if a player saw my dad, they'd come over and talk about the game. Billy, what'd you think? I can't believe this and I can't believe that. So it was almost so much fun. And Dad's just trying to get away and see the golfers, and they were trying to see him because everybody's a sports fan. But I grew up a huge Greg Norman fan. So for me to try to follow Greg in the heartbreak of I feel like it's kind of like my Tennessee Vols in the NCAA tournament, right? With Greg Norman at Augusta, it's the same kind of thing. So the irony that now I'm associated with Nick Faldo, and he knew of my infinity for Greg. So between going there and seeing Freddie and seeing Norman, and just being able to walk around. I mean, it's I'm very blessed to be able to go next week, and it never gets old. I've worked there many times for CBS, and I produced the initial drive, chip, and putt for the first 9 years, the Augusta National Women's AM for 4 years, and got to spend the whole week down there. And so to get on a golf cart and pretend that you have a meeting at Amen Corner, and you don't. You just are like, I've got to go meet with so and so, and you just drive down there and you're just hanging down there by yourself.
Yeah.
And my wife was able to be a spotter with her best friend at the Augusta National Women's AM and walk inside the ropes. And so the tournament's been part of our family for a long, long time.
One of my media colleagues who has been able to cover it for a number of years for Golf Digest described it as both the most highly anticipated and most dreaded week all rolled into one.
Hmm.
In some ways, because of the care and the precision that you have to adhere to for language
Hmm.
when you're broadcasting and when you're doing those kind of public interfacing things. So, front
Yeah.
nine is it's not front nine and back nine.
Yeah.
It's they're patrons, they're not fans. It's not a gallery kind of a thing. I can only imagine from the producer's seat how uniquely different Masters Week is from literally every other, even major tournaments on the schedule.
Yeah.
You kind of take us inside the conversations and the team training, so to speak, that's different about Augusta.
Yeah. If you had to do it every week, I think it would drive you crazy. But I think it's the fact that it's 1 week and the grounds are so special and the people are really great to work with. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed working with everybody down there, and you get it. Hey, there's a set of rules. If you don't like the rules, then don't go. And I mean, you saw, Gary McCord's a dear friend, but Gary's last year was 94, and that wasn't his cup of tea. Faraday, it wasn't his cup of tea. But you've seen other people adapt to it. But yeah, no, you have a glossary of tournament practice area rather than the range, and you have those.
That's true. Is
But
it a
again, that
written glossary? Everybody.
yeah, you just kind of have a printed version. And I'll give you another story, and I guess I can tell the story, but we had Bones was such a fan of the Augusta National Women's Amateur, and they gave us the blessing to have an on-course walker. And so, now that Dottie is for the on the CBS side, we were able to have Bones, and we had to have meeting. They were adamant they didn't want to see Bones. That was kind of the number one rule: was that you can have a walker, but we don't want to see the walker. And we blocked off where he could and could not walk on the golf course. Now here's a guy who won the tournament as a caddy 3 times. He pretty much knows every blade of grass there. And it sounds like no big deal, but there are some crosswalks in areas. When you get down to 11, 12, 13, you're so used to after your tee shot on 12 to walk over the bridge. Well, as a walker, you've got to kind of cut through to 13. When 13 to 14, that on the right side ends about 100 yards short of the green. Kind of have to stop there. The crosswalk from 15 to see the third shot back to 16 tee. So it was pretty complicated for Bones to have to go through there. We blocked it off and did a full walk off in rehearsal on Friday for our Saturday show. And then the Butler Cabin, there's 2 things. There's the opening tee shot, which is true for obviously the opening ceremony for the Masters, but the Augusta National Women's AM had that too. Where the mic had to be working, and we weren't even on the air yet. We were, let's see, this was always at 8 a.m. We were on the air at noon, so you're 4 hours away, but that had to go well. And then the presentation of Butler Cabin, whether it was for CBS or for us on NBC with the women's amateur, had to go perfect. So there were some pretty nerve-wracking times of things that you, as a producer, you just can't control. I can't control the audio; those are for the experts to do that. I can control what you pick and what shot you show. But some of those things are more important than not covering the winner, but nuts and bolts that you would do throughout the show.
Tradition has to be defended. It has to be upheld if you want it to continue to be a tradition. And at the same time, some of it can be eye-rolling. I mean, the Butler Cabin moment, we would be as fans, and I count
Patriots.
myself,
Patriots.
well, I count myself as a fan because I'm
I
at
know.
home. Yeah, I'm at home. As I watch that from home, it's always stilted. It's never very smooth with the jacket being put on. It never quite goes on smoothly, and that kind of thing. But if they were to do away with that post round, here's the top am, and then here's the champion and the defense, all of that, and the awkwardness between Jim and the Fred Ridley now, we as golf fans, we would really feel like a chunk of us had been removed. So you continue to do these things, even though from a digital age standpoint, it's very analog.
Mm.
And Augusta's perfectly fine with that. And I think golf fans are as well for that 1 week.
Well, it's really interesting. Think about the 2 ends of the spectrum from them. They have the best app maybe in all of sports.
They do.
They are so far ahead of everyone else of covering every shot, what they're doing this year from the tournament practice area, being able to cover and collect that data. And yet they are so the same way as that tradition was, in 1975. They're adamant of doing that. And that's a beauty that they have. I mean, I've been very fortunate to be on those grounds a lot of times. Even when the club was closed, we would go and have meetings, and it didn't look the same. They were doing construction and work. And remember the first year where the merchandise area was being built. I mean, the old one was, 100 degrees and way too small. And they built the new one. This is, I think, maybe the year or 2 years after they built the new media center that looked like it had been there since 1934. And then you walk in, and again, it kind of is the historical vibe, but it's brand new. So I know when you have a lot of money, you can do things, but they still do it right. And then conversely, their food's the best price food
Yeah.
in the history of sports. It's somehow that ham and cheese sandwich, I can't replicate it. I don't know why. It's a piece of ham with a piece of cheese on a piece of whole wheat with some mustard that's kind of cold. And I can go to Publix or Kroger and I can't do justice of what a good job they do with that sandwich for $2.
I remember my first time on the property was as a patron, and was with another guy, and we went like millions have done since then. Went through the concession area and went to check out, and it was, whatever, $11 or something for an armful of food.
Yeah.
And she said that the lady at the checkout register said, "Sir, this is Augusta National. We don't need your money here."
Mm.
Which I found didn't apply in the merchandise area, but
Yeah.
in the food
Correct. Correct.
area, it definitely did. So, Brandt, as a guy whose very DNA is plugged into production and the presentation of these big time events, you're certainly well aware that on a large scale, golf fans are frustrated with how the rest of the golf broadcast season goes, whether it's Champions Tour, LPGA, or PGA Tour, with the commercial load and the interruptions and what seems to be of straying away from the showing of shots as opposed to following a guy around as he aim putts for, aim points for 90 seconds before he putts. Can you bring us inside the chair of the producer for what is actually out of your control, like commercial load, and the things that are under your control, and how you deal with all of those voices that are like, we want it better, we want it faster, we want something different.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of reading on self-awareness. Deepak Chopra was Super Brain, and so I'm a huge believer in self-awareness and are at the moment. And so I think what people have to understand is on a par 72 hole, a par 72 golf course, you theoretically could show 32 shots at the same time, or 32 shots could be hit at the same time. Now, realistically, is that happening? No, but cut that in half, right? So now 16 more realistically could be hit at the same time. Cut that in half. Let's say there's 8 within a 10-second standpoint, right? So as a producer, you have to be self-aware to know, am I at the right place at the right time? And you can only show one shot at a time. The other ones you have to put on tape. And you have to realize, okay, if I show this shot, then my next sequence on tape is boom, boom, boom to get back to live with boom. So you and I can have the argument of what's the most important shot to show at that time. Now, probably on Sunday, you and I are going to be on the same page of what's the most important shot to show at the right time, right? Thursday, we can make a totally different argument. I mean, there's some producers that believe that, on Thursday, if a player's -7, and that player might not be a big time player, and there is a big time player like a McIlroy or a Spieth or whomever is at -2, that -7 should be shown over that -2. There's some people that believe, hey, these are our TV groups that are paired back to back. We're covering just this. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I always had the analogy of if you had a football game or a basketball game and you put CBS and Fox and NBC and the production trucks together and they're producing the same show and you just had the outputs of TV screens of all three, if you sat back and looked up, they would look pretty much identical. Now, the only things that would change would be, coming out of that opening kickoff, are you going to focus on the quarterback? Or are you going to focus on the defensive back? But in essence, when the play starts, those three screens look alike.
Yeah.
I've always said conversely, if you did a golf tournament and had CBS, NBC, and Golf Channel, or really now with Live and Fox, and they're doing the same tournament and put those screens up, on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or really even a Sunday, you might go a whole hour and not see all three at the same part at the same time. And I was always fascinated with timing. Every golf course I did, I took a stopwatch and I timed it. And I timed every green to every tee. So I knew what's my walk from 11 to 12. Can I sneak in a commercial? Can I show 3 or 4 players and they get back to that tee shot? I was fascinated with time. And so those are things I could control. Now, what you can't control is, and not to get off on this soliloquy, but if you just looked at it from a selfish perspective, right? So the PGA Tour in their last TV negotiations, there were a lot of people that said that he had to go for as much as he could because the last deal had been for so long, especially with the Golf Channel, and it's just time for them to re-up for as much money as they could, right? That's technically his job from a selfish perspective.
Closing
And
the
he did
Tiger era out as well.
correct. So, but Tiger had just won the Masters, a couple years prior, so they were trying to squeeze that, and Live had not happened yet, right? So he really held all the cards. So to his defense, he got as much out of those networks as he possibly could, right? So now you're the networks, and now Tiger gets hurt again. Live comes around. You can argue that I don't think you can argue, but some would. Your product is not nearly as good because you've lost superstars and depth to your tour. So now here you are, the network that's really covering the exact same product you had before. I argue the product's worse, not worse, but it's definitely lessened, right? Because there's been things taken out. So
Diluted.
you're covering the same at best, but you just paid 3 times for it.
Yeah.
So for the only reason for you to keep a job and make that up is you have to, okay, cut, and you have to add inventory. You have to do whatever you can in order to recoup that. So now you're the tour and you're going to these sponsors and saying, okay, for us to guarantee certain players to play in your events, we're having to up how much it costs to have and created a signature event. So everyone from a selfish perspective, again, I don't mean that as a negative, but I mean, if your job was Jay Monahan or your job is the head of CBS or NBC, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Now, has that made the TV product better? And I think, you can pretty much poll anyone and they're going to say no. But everybody did their job in order to what was ahead of them and being self-aware at the moment, in essence, to survive. So now this is where we are. This is where the product is. And I think for it to really take off and take that next level, everyone's going to have to take the selfish hat off and take a step back and say, okay, what do we need to do here? What do we, do we need to give some things back to the networks? Can the networks and I argue it's all about commercials, all this other stuff that the tracers are great. These walk and talk interviews. Yep. All that's nice, but it's the foundation to the house. It's if you don't know what your foundation to the house is and you're worried about your swimming pool or you're worried about the driveway in the back, it's the foundation. And to me, the foundation is the amount of commercials, because if I'm a viewer, I just roll my eyes and go, my gosh, how much more golf am I missing versus everything else? So I think that's where they got to start. And you just got to say, take the linear model that's been there forever, blow it up, ask the advertisers, okay, what can we do to stay live to appease you? And would you be happy with this? Because it's just not, the model's not working.
Yeah. Well, you can tune into a tournament and you'll see a commercial that airs for, let's say, the Convention and Visitors Bureau from St. Pete for a tournament that was a month ago. And you realize, oh, they're running make goods right now because they didn't deliver on the numbers that they were supposed to deliver on. And yet one of the things that I've really come to appreciate about you, Brandt, is that you're a creative thinker. I would have to think that somewhere, even on a napkin where you've sketched out an idea, there's something better out there than the shrunken box playing through moment where both products are diluted because you're disconnected from both of them. And by the way, you've seen that commercial now 43 times.
That's right.
And so you could sing along with the bouncing ball you don't even need the bouncing ball. Is there maybe it's even partially what you alluded to with the Let's Hang Live. Is there some other way for that advertiser to feel like they're getting the impact they're paying for, but still let the tournament stay as the primary objective? NASCAR has to take breaks. Baseball has breaks built in. Football has to take breaks. We understand it. College football is unwatchable.
Well, the NCAA tournament, I mean, think about now too. I mean,
unwatchable.
Yeah.
If you're like me, you almost always, unless your team is in like a championship moment, I just record it, watch it later, and just zoom through it because I can't stand all the breaks. Is there a better idea out there?
Well, there's a template that already exists with the USGA package. Now, granted, this was done when they signed with Fox for for the crazy number that they did, and NBC has since taken it over for really pennies on the dollar. But you look at what they did with Rolex. I mean, there were U.S. amateurs and U.S. women's amateurs and Walker Cups and Curtis Cups that I produced that we had no commercials.
Hmm.
And it was, yes, they interrupted the action to tell you that it was uninterrupted by Rolex, but
But it
that
works.
that 10 seconds was not as bad as a 3.5 minute break that you got to take 6 times during an hour. So, and you just look, at the Players Championship, there's limited commercials. You saw that they superimposed the logo, like they do on a 1st and 10 line. So
Right.
that answer is yes. And you've seen what Callaway did at Century, where they went in and had the last hour, commercial free. So yes, I mean, I think they've answered their own question. There's templates out there, and they have to. Again, I don't want to say blow up the process that they have or the model that they have, but they have to look at it from a different perspective. And I think these companies need to go through and go, if I just had to pay 15 million and now I have to pay 25 million, you would think they would have the leverage to say, well, this is how we want it done. Now, maybe these companies don't want to do it that way, and they're content with having those make goods and as many commercials as they can. And again, if they are that, and again, I don't mean selfish from a negative, then they are looking at it from, hey, wait a minute, we just had to pay 25 million. Look at what Truist is doing,
Hmm.
taking over for Wells Fargo, paying that 25 million for the next 8 years. They might say, hey, from a selfish perspective, yeah, you better believe we're getting those ads in. But that's my point. I just think everybody has to take a third of a step back to make this really go forward, rather than thinking of it from a selfish perspective, because you keep hearing about the fans, the fans, the fans, and the creator stuff. That's great if you want to do that. But again, that's an addition to the house. That's not the foundation. That's not the answer.
Hmm.
I think you got to get the foundation right before you start doing that other stuff.
Well, let me talk through an idea with you, and you can just tell me if it's a one or a 10 or somewhere in between. But I recently had a conversation with the CEO of a hospitality and entertainment mega family-owned destination, and I had suggested to him that they would do well to purchase this particular golf course. It was about 10 minutes from them because the golf course they already have, which is fantastic, is just busy all the time. So I said, you could really use some more holes in the ground and you could just turn that little property around. And he said, have you always found it this easy to spend other people's money? And
Yeah.
I kind of laughed. I said, actually, it's much easier when it's other people's money. So
Right.
with that as my disclaimer, let's just throw out there a company like Callaway for a moment. Fill in the blank with any product you'd like to, but they're spending a fair amount of money in the game. They're creating commercials. They've got players that are dedicating days on their contract to come out and just do photo shoots and video shoots, and it all gets converted into the spots that we see and we tune out.
Right.
Frankly, we just tune them out. Other than the brand reinforcement that we have from, it's elite, and we know that that's the case. But in reality, wouldn't those companies, this is sort of touching into the let's hang world, wouldn't those companies do well to obtain the contact information for a bunch of the viewers that they're never going to get in a passive commercial, 30-second commercial?
Right.
Isn't it more beneficial to them to let the play continue, but here we are all on our 65 or 85-inch screens, and in the lower right corner up pops a QR code with a scan this for your chance to win a full set of elite clubs. And when you scan it, you go to a thing where you register for this competition online. And by the end of the broadcast, they announce the winner.
Yep.
Why are we not doing this?
I agree. And think about the goodwill. I mean, you saw what MasterCard did for the Arnold Palmer,
Right.
doing the player caddy. Now, again, is doing it with a player and caddy as good as saying we're going to go uninterrupted? And theoretically, it bit them in the rear end because they missed Henley's shot. Of all the things that they're going to be less commercials, and on 16, Henley's shot was they had got to it late when he chipped in to, in essence, win the golf tournament, which there was irony there. So I think the good news is companies are starting to think this way and starting to think outside the box. But again, it's going to take the tour, it's going to take the networks. I mean, everyone's going to have to give in. But again, I know everyone's hammered the networks, and I came from that network level, um, and I left because a lot of these cutbacks. So I, to be completely honest, but I do have sympathy with them because, like I said, you just paid X amount of an increase in your return on your investment. Like I said, if it was a restaurant, right, and you go in and it had your favorite meal forever, and you walk in and they don't have that meal anymore, and the thing you ordered is double the price and the food's not as good. That's tough to keep saying. We'll keep coming back to our restaurant over and over and over.
Yep.
And that's in essence what these sorry, what these networks have to do. And what's really interesting too is the Twitter world has become such a negative, everything stinks.
Yeah, it does.
But and there's I've gotten to know a lot of these guys. I've gotten to know a lot of those people, and I've had conversations with them and said, look, you can't. I talk about, like, if I'm going on a trip, right, and this is my suitcase, and I have everything packed, and there's four more shirts I want to put in. Well, four have to come out, right? So, and what I mean by that is there were a certain amount, like if we did a 3 hour telecast, we had 18 commercials, right? So you start thinking that's 6 an hour. So I always wanted to protect the last hour. So I tried to get jam in 7, hour 1 and hour 2. So I only had, X amount that last hour because I wanted to protect the last 4 holes with the fewest breaks possible. So what that meant was that, and my announcers all knew, hey, that this first 45 minutes of this telecast is probably not going to be pretty.
Mm.
I'm going to jam in the sponsored elements. I'm going to jam in the promos. I'm going to get a couple breaks ahead. But
So
knowing
you have that prerogative as the producer, right? You just
100%, yeah,
okay.
100%. And now if you do a football game or a basketball game,
Yeah.
you know exactly when you're going to commercial. That's why I think it's fascinating if you had all 3 outputs, because the producer picks exactly when you go to break. And so mine were based on, like I said, I didn't know who I was going to show, but when I did the timing of a golf course, I knew what the flow was. If there were long walks from tees, I knew it was going to be putt out commercial, tee shot commercial. If you do a colonial or a place that has short, that was like a Kapalua, right? If you do a colonial and it's a short walk, I knew it was green, tee shot commercial, second shot commercial. So in my mind before it started, and I always had a commercial group. I picked one group. I didn't care what it was. And that group might change a little bit, but like that's when they put out, I'm going to break. And I know I'm going to miss shot, boom, 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 but I'm always going to be live with them. Because when I got greedy and tried to show that I can get that, I can get that, I can get that, by the time I tried to sneak those 4 or 5 shots in, my commercial group was up next.
Mm.
And now I'm a commercial behind, right? And where I wanted to get a commercial ahead. So make a very short story long, when those guys would complain and say, man, it was great when you guys would come on the air and have a 20-minute opening segment. Nothing's better. I'd go, okay, great. So your suitcase is packed, right? If I have to get 6 commercials in that first hour where I wanted 7, so now start doing the math of where you start breaking those down. So
Yeah.
now I'm way behind, which means
Right.
either the middle of the show or the end of the show is going to look terrible. So those same people who would complain about or love that 20-minute segment would complain at the end, my God, they just jammed 3 commercials in on the last hole. And you go, well, exactly. You can't have everything. So, as a producer, you do have to pick what you want to do. And a lot of times the leaderboard dictated it. You might have a leaderboard where 2 guys had separated themselves. And I had that in Napa when Thagala won. I mean, Bill, you could have done that tournament with your eyes closed. Those 2 hit, you go to commercial. You come back. Those 2 hit, you go. I mean, but then you do an event. Every year I did Sony or RSM. I mean, I'm telling you, it felt like we had 15 guys within 2 shots. And you were like, oh my God, like someone make a par, right? Please. So that dictates it. So it's hard, but you can't have everything. You can't. And so the beauty of a producer is, how do you get fewer commercials? And by limiting commercials, but adding to that commercial time, that's not the answer either. Because that's been done too, to say, hey, we went from 6 commercials an hour that were all 2.5 minutes. Now we only have 5,
but they're 4
but we added time to it. That does you no good. You've got to rethink this for this product to work.
Well, and my frustration, I don't think, is as much with the networks as it is with the advertisers who all work with giant agencies. They're really smart. They do their research, they do their homework. And for some reason, they settle on making 2 commercials for the entire season. I'll never understand that. And they insist on pounding us with them over and over again in an age where interaction is how everything else works. That's how Let's Hang Live works. That's why we have QR codes. That's why we do all these interesting little things to get people.
You're
If
right.
if 84% of us already have a device in our hands, why, as the advertiser, would you not want to do something that has me make use of this while I'm watching your screen?
And I think it's more valuable than the split screen. I mean, as a producer, I hated the playing throughs. It was I mean, I always argued, what are we trying to accomplish in a playing through? Are we just showing what we would normally show? Are we trying? I always tried to bury and try to show like the last couple guys of the first page or their second page. I was adamant, I'm not going to show anything that is relevant, right? But from a fan perspective, you are telling me, the network is telling me, don't watch this commercial. You want to watch this action. So what does that say to an advertiser that, hey, we're going to commercial and we're basically telling our folks, don't look at what you're doing. I mean, I've never, I get what they're trying to do. Hey, we're with More Golf Live. But like, again, if you were at a football game, right, and it's a huge 3rd and 3, so let's say it's 2nd and 7, right, and you gain 4. So now it's a huge 3rd and 3, and you go to a commercial, and you're showing the split screen of the 3rd and 3 with a Bud Light ad. You would say that would happen one time in a big NFL game in November. And I mean, you would lose it, right? Basketball game, you got 2 shots here, 45 seconds to go. You make the first one, second one, we're in a double box. You'd be like, what are we doing? So I hate them from a producer's perspective.
Yeah, well, fortunately, basketball now gives us 4 minutes to look at a replay review while we're at break, and then we can go
Right.
back and see whose cuticle touched the ball last before it went out of bounds.
And real quick, off of that, I mean, football, NFL started doing them where they would stay, they'd be a score, and then they would do this. And it's even dumber because there is no action. You're just seeing guys on the sideline. So for me, I'm like,
Right.
that's even more to say, hey, there is no action going on. So give me a full commercial if I'm an advertiser. That to me makes no sense. But again, I think if you start taking what golf does and relate it to other sports, you would last a quarter and go, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And that's what we're dealing with.
And meanwhile, in college football, we'll go touchdown commercial, extra point commercial, kickoff commercial.
I know.
You're like, what is just happening? And if you're in the stadium, by the way, brutal experience.
I know.
Brutal.
I know. But again, that's your Michigan football. You guys do an 18 plays, 7-minute drive, where in essence, you could sneak in 2 commercials, but that drive happens, and they got to make up commercials somehow here.
Yeah, that's true. Well, leaders and best. What are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so with these differences in how the tournaments are presented, and knowing that at the Masters, there are 3 sponsors. There's Cadillac, Travelers, and IBM. Traditionally, I don't know if that's the same 3 for this year, but it doesn't vary a whole lot. And there's probably quite a waiting list to get into that. But we also know there's only one 90-second break, I think, at the top and bottom of each hour, or maybe it's just once an hour. I can't remember how they break it. It's wonderful, whatever it is.
It's great.
From a producer's standpoint, is that easier or more difficult to manage?
Well, that's a great question. We had at Augusta National Women's AM, we had for 3 hours, I want to say we had 4 90-second breaks. And then we had basically an end break that once play was done, we had a longer break to get us into the Butler cabin. So there were 5 breaks, but 4 in action. And you had to spread them out. I mean, you didn't want to make sure that a couple shots and then show another break and then, go like 90 minutes without one. So no, it's obviously easier. I mean, the less you have, the easier. I tell you where Augusta, because their technology is so great, and they were really the first ones with Amen Corner and featured groups and, 15 and 16 and that sort of thing. It did expose a producer, and I'm not calling anybody out. It would happen no matter who you are. If the featured groups are on whomever, and there's other guys you need, if you're producing that, hey, I only have these 2 or these 3 players, or, if I got an Amen Corner, I have these holes. So that's all you need to show. It did expose how much golf, when I get back to my 32 shots can be hit at the same time. If I have, again, secondary device, I've got my featured group on my phone and I'm watching the telecast. Well, on my phone, I just saw player X and Y hit into 12. right? And then now a minute later, I'm seeing it on the telecast, hit
Yeah.
into 12. And you can't always say earlier, a moment ago, earlier, because there's a lot. That really exposed, and again, I was as guilty as anybody. That exposed a lot of producers more than anything, because like I said, those feature groups are just following those shots. They're not following the other whatever threesomes or twosomes that are out there. So I had a bigger issue with that, because it was just, that's when I think the Twitter world started complaining, because people started saying, wait a minute, you guys are a minute behind, but they weren't, I'm not going to say they weren't smart enough. They weren't aware enough to realize that feature group is totally different than what the main broadcast is going through.
Right.
But people became, hey, I'm going to get on Twitter and expose and say, this is messed up. And Lance Barrow, who produced Forever, is a dear, dear friend of mine. And we talked about this all the time. I mean, Mark Loomis, when he worked at Fox, I had it when Tommy Roy and I would do the US Open. I mean, you're at the mercy of that. But I think that's when people started realizing that it's unlike a football game, or you're not going to say a moment ago, this was 3rd and 5. Now we get you live to the field goal, right? I mean, again, if you relate it to another sport, it's unlike anything that's out there.
Well, we could open the door to the discussion about how that impacts live gaming moments and all of that kind of
Right.
thing, because across the entire sports universe, that's an issue if people are trying to predict plays as they're happening, or
Yep.
however, nothing surprises me anymore in the world of pervasive gaming, but with the technology in place to show live or to come back and show it delayed, if somebody has that inside information, they're going to do fairly well in their prediction
Well,
business.
so it's really interesting off of that. I mean, the tour has shot length. So technically, as soon as a shot is hit, that data's in whether you made or missed.
Yeah.
But what the tour doesn't have is access of, like at Hilton Head, for example. I mean, it's one of the great golf courses in the country. And I played it in the Junior Heritage and been down there 1,000 times. You could hit every fairway and be dead because you're on the wrong side and you got the big moss tree and the moss hanging down. So if you're betting with, hey, can so-and-so hit the green in 2? If you're on shot link, it says fairway hit.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean you're in a good spot. Conversely, let's just say if I hit my approach shot, let's say I'm betting Tiger versus Phil in their heyday, or I got Rory and Scotty, right? And I'm betting in the heyday. Second shot's hit, or let's say a ball, I hit a tee shot, fairway, right? And so now I can see shot. I haven't shown the shot live, but I can see on shot link he hit a fairway. So technically, I have no advantage if I'm betting. What if the ball's in a divot? Shot link doesn't show that. What if I hit my second shot and it's in the bunker and it's plugged? Doesn't show that, but I can see that. Cameraman can see that. A walker can see that. A volunteer can see that. Again, that's information that is pretty valuable to somebody if they were betting on something. That is a huge kink in the armor, I think.
It just the possibilities are endless, to say the
No
least.
question.
Let's close it out with another master's question. If you were not working, if you just had your patron's badge on, but you could go and get a really good seat at any vantage point on the golf course, where is Brandt Packer going to sit and watch play?
It depends what day it is. It depends who's on the golf course. I'll take the range, tournament practice area. If you had everybody warming up who you wanted to see, my wife and I last year, I mean, like I said, we're very lucky to go, and we walked around last year. And again, this is April, and we got done, and we're getting ready to leave, and Bryson was teeing off by himself, and Caleb Surratt, who's a good buddy of mine, who played at Tennessee, who's on the Live Tour on Rom's group. We were walking with him, and Bryson was teeing off, and my wife and I were like, let's just go watch him play 1, 2, 3, and head out the back gate. And there was nobody watching him.
Really?
So, but again, this is Bryson in April. This is prior to Bryson winning the U.S. Open, right? So, sometimes you get lucky and you walk around and there's a guy playing by himself. You're like, oh, let's go watch him. And to watch Bryson play 1, 2, 3. Actually, we watched him 1, 2, 3, 4. The driver's on 2, trying to hit driving on 3, but I would say the tournament practice area is hard to beat when you get the right guys hitting balls and you can just kind of grab a sandwich and sit back. But I'd say on the golf course, probably 6 and 16 are always fun because you can see that second shot into 15. You can see them teeing off on 16. And then if you've never been there, you don't realize that 16 and 6, I mean, they basically hit right on top of you on 6, which I always thought was a pretty underrated spot to sit and and sit back and watch.
Yeah. Well, when you're all watching, remember that Sunday night, the goal without a playoff is 8 p.m. on Let's Hang Live. It's
We'll
free.
get you on. Absolutely.
Free. You can chime in. You can ask questions of a guy with 3 green jackets in Nick Faldo, 6 major championships, and who, by the way, I don't believe comes with a filter. So
No, trust. I can assure you of that.
yeah, I have to think that it's just going to be a fantastic interaction. I'm planning to take part in it myself. Let Nick know that if he would like any game insights from me, he can also ask the questions my way.
No question.
Yeah, as a
No
five
question.
handicap, I have a lot to offer him.
That to me is the follow up after, hey Nick, how did you win your third when you came back to beat Norman?
Yeah.
My follow up is, I've noticed you're taking it dead inside, and here's something you can work on. So I've already given the heads up that Michigan Golf Live and Bill, tell them you sent them, and
Yeah.
then we'll put them on, and we know that there's a question coming.
Yes, I
Done
appreciate it.
deal.
It is good to see you. Thanks for the
Always a
insight.
pleasure. Thanks.
Maybe it was inside baseball for the two of us, but I think some of our audience is going to find it interesting how the broadcasts are put together. So really appreciate it. Have fun.
Yeah,
Have fun at
pleasure.
Augusta.
I will. Thanks. Always a pleasure. Great seeing you.